war in Syria, how much of it is really a proxy war among the international and major powers in the region?
Greetings and thanks for having me. There's no doubt that there is a lot of foreign involvement in this war. As you know, it's not just Russia, but also Iran on the side of President Assad. And it's not just the United States, but also a number of Gulf countries and some other NATO countries fighting ISIS. And over the years, we have sometimes tried as well to strengthen the moderate opposition groups, if we could find any true moderate opposition groups, to put pressure on Assad, although I don't expect as much of that to continue under President Trump. So there are a lot of foreign players. However, there are also a lot of internal players. And it is very much an internal civil war in which Assad and many of his fellow Alawite and some Christian and some Sunni regime supporters take on many of the other opposition forces who are primarily Sunni or Kurd. And so there are strong sectarian tensions and fault lines. There are also important internal and civil war dimensions to this. It is really, as General Petraeus likes to say, a geopolitical Chernobyl. It is a huge disaster and everyone is involved, it seems.
Right. It seems so many things into one, as Mr. O'Hanlon earlier explained. Of course, as a UN Security Council member, China has always been trying to suggest that peace is the most important thing. But at this point, is the so-called leaving or staying in power of Mr. Assad, the president, still important? As we have known, there's a change of leadership in Washington. As we have known, there are other priorities of fighting terrorism.
Well, it's quite obviously now the leaving or keeping Assad now is not a question anymore, because he has already shown to the whole of the world that now he is the thing, is the person is very necessary for keep the Syria things going forward. Even now the Trump administration has not echoed those opinions given by the President Obama, saying Assad must go. This is a precondition for all the Syria crisis get to be resolved. So people now switched folks now from chasing the Assad away. Now folks switched folks to the this terror issue, how to finally defeat this ISIL. So that's going to be the new folks. Only these folks can unite Russia and the United States together. So even the Saudi, those Gulf countries, now they would like to find a new alliance. So we can see the Netanyahu now travel to the Moscow, and also Turkey travel to Moscow. Even Saudi now wants to close with Russia.
Of course, with the rise of Mr. Trump as the U.S. president, we see a lot of geopolitical new possibilities as he described with his strategy. Mr. O'Hanlon, but the question is he really having the power to change the tendency of Washington, this big machine itself? Or he's mainly focusing on rhetorics, and eventually after 1 year or two, everything will go back to the original track, which once again means the original state of the Syrian crisis?
No, I don't think it'll necessarily go back to what it was. And I agree with my colleague, the professor in your studio, that the emphasis on displacing Assad is probably gone for good, at least as a central element of a short-term strategy. I don't think that will come back. However, and I don't know if the professor would agree with me on this, but even if you tolerate Assad, even if we decide we can tolerate Assad, that doesn't end the war. Assad may control the major cities, but he does not control most of the north or the east. And of course, we still have the problems of ISIS and al-Qaeda inside of Syria that we're all concerned about. And so I think that we actually need to think harder about some kind of a political solution. It's not enough just to say that we'll tolerate Assad. We need to think of some way in which the Sunni populations of Syria can be given, I think, some degree of autonomy and some degree of confidence that they won't be attacked again by Assad, because as you know, he's been very brutal in many of the tactics that he's employed to put down the insurrection, and it's killed a lot of innocent people, most of them Sunnis. So I think we need a strategy that includes some concept of some autonomous zones, some devolution of power from Damascus, and if we do that and uphold it with some kind of an international peacekeeping force and then some reconstruction assistance, I think we might be able to see our way towards an end to the war.
That sounds like a big plan, but Ms. He, I also understand people are looking at the history of this war over the past 6 to 7 years and suggesting the problem originally, there were some, but it has been spiraling out of control as a result of foreign involvement. We don't want to, at this point, Ms. He, to complain about foreign involvement because it's already become a reality. But when we are talking about the solutions, what shall we need to do to deal with this foreign involvement? Because it has always been there and will always be there.
Well, I think in order to resolve this crisis, like President Assad has said, this year, 2017, he wants to bring the peace back to the Syria. So in order to reach this, I think all those involved foreign players, they have to readjust their policy. So those countries, they still stick to the original plan, that is to chase out the President Assad. Maybe they need to readjust them to switch their focus, or now, first of all, to the anti-terror. So to wipe out these evil forces, that is ISIL, and then that will give the new space for the new talk between Syria government and the rebel forces. Because until the end of the day, only those two, Syria government and rebel forces, are the two strongest forces to determine this future of Syria.
I see. But Mr. O'Hanlon, do you think the other so-called foreign powers, whether Russia or the United States, Gulf regions or Turkey, Iran, are they going to sit on their hands and wait for different sides within the country to figure out a solution? Are they going to use the name of fighting ISIL to once again gain advantage in the overall situation here in Syria?
Well, yeah, the other foreign players and also President Assad are not going to simply be content with defeating ISIS. They all have broader agendas, and I'm afraid we need a strategy that accounts for that. You mentioned earlier that my proposed strategy of devolution of power sounded ambitious, but I'm afraid we have to be ambitious if we want to find ways that Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Jordan and Assad himself, obviously Russia, other countries can tolerate the outcome. Because if they don't have at least a minimal level of acceptability about this idea, about the end state we're trying to pursue, they will continue to inject weapons and other kinds of resources that perpetuate the war. And by the way, President Assad doesn't yet consider himself to have succeeded completely. He still wants to control his whole country, and he wants to destroy every opposition group, not just the ones that are extremists like ISIS or al-Qaeda. So we need some kind of a strategy that recognizes that fact. I don't think we can let Assad win the war nationwide. For one thing, he doesn't have enough manpower to do it. You know, he's got a relatively small population base that supports his regime. So that's why I talk about devolution of power, the creation of autonomous zones. I think that's what we're going to have to aim for to make everyone at least minimally tolerant of the objectives that are being pursued, so they won't keep injecting all these arms and other destabilizing elements into the country itself.
But that's exactly what they're doing right now, all the parties involved, particularly the so-called foreign forces. Ms. He, I mean, once again, the question really important is, are they going to, others in the region or even beyond, use the excuse of so-called finding a solution, use the excuse of so-called cracking down on terrorism as a strategic advantage they could gain inside the region?
That's very possible. You know, now this is the real world here. To some extent, these rules for in the jungle still play its part of role in this geopolitical issue. So all those players, I mean, in the Syria, like rebel forces, behind them there are Gulf countries, and even behind them there is another big players. So all of those players, they have their own interests. They want to use to make their interests, you know, to the maximum levels. So that's why this Syria crisis, this talk, this negotiation takes so many round of talk and still not promising.
Talking about the history of this chaos inside Syria, we do have a timeline for all of you. Look at the past 7 years in which Syria has been very much challenged at this prolonged war. Take a look.
In July 2012, after 18 months of protests, the Red Cross declared Syria was in a state of civil war.
President
The
Assad
U.S.
now has a
failure to
choice.
forcefully respond to the red line of chemical weapon attacks disappointed Syria's opposition. In 2013, ISIL entered the Syria conflict that changed the dynamics of the war. In 2015, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the deployment of Russian forces to Syria. The intervention immediately tipped the military balance in the government's favor. The recapture of eastern Aleppo by the government and government-aligned forces was the most significant victory for President Assad in the conflict to date.
We only have 1 minute left for both of you. For you, Mr. O'Halloran, with the policy still not clear between Washington and Moscow, how do you think the war in Syria is likely to be shaped as a result?
Well, I think what we're going to have to move towards is confederation, or at least devolution of power. Russia can help protect Assad's hold on power in the West and retain its military bases, and have felt that it established its own credibility as a major power by its actions to shore up the regime. I may not like those, Americans may not like those actions, but for Russia they were a reaffirmation, reassertion of Russian power. That may be enough for Russia.
Okay.
The confederation or devolution model may be enough for the Sunni states, because at least the Sunnis in Syria wouldn't have to live directly under Assad's rule, even if he was still nominally the president of the whole country. So that's why I think this kind of a model of devolution has a chance.
Okay, Ms. He, final words from you briefly if you can. What can the others do, really, now?
But I think before the White House made it clear about policy on Syria, from the perspective of the Putin and also Assad side, they want to make use of this kind of uncertainty time to get as much as they can do. So more land territory in their charge and more, bargaining chips in their hand.